The problematic prince. The sea was lost in the deep dark of the night. White foam scattered past the ship as waves crashed against the hull. The noise of it felt like a dreary note of despair, a noise that wasn't present during the day, like the light muted it. There was also the sound of a wrapper being opened and the lip smack of someone chewing on chocolate. Erna ate the chocolate she had been given however many days ago. She lost count. She looked out into the darkness as she ate. The cold bit at her cheeks and knuckles of the hand that held firm to the railing, but she didn't feel it. It was just past midnight when Erna decided to step out from the cabin to get some fresh air. It had been a pleasant enough evening, thanks to Bjorn's return, but for some reason, she just couldn't get to sleep. Was she angry? She was too sad to be that. So maybe it was sadness? That too didn't feel appropriate. Whatever it was, it felt like a sluggishness that wouldn't shake, a lethargy that sleep would not fix. So Erna came out onto the deck with a bag of chocolates in her hand. Lisa told Erna that when you're feeling depressed, you should eat something sweet. Lisa had been shocked to hear of the relationship between Viscountess Forrester and Princess Gladys. Her reaction was so sudden that even the head maid Karen flinched. Lisa was the only person on her side on this whole ship. Erna felt so lonely when she realized that. She had already prepared herself for the unwelcoming role of the Grand Duchess, but even her own husband didn't seem to be on her side, and that made her feel cold. Is he really a poisonous mushroom? While she chewed on the question, staring out into the endless darkness of the night sea, she popped another piece of chocolate into her mouth and chewed on that instead. The images of Bjorn and Yester formed in the shapeless dark, emerging one by one. The troublemaker, problematic prince. Flirt, prodigal son, bad guy. The Bjorn Erna knew was nothing like any of those things. Sure, he could be a little ill-willed at times, but he was never anything like his reputation. Some said he should have taken after his father, but he could never be like that. He could never be like that. But what if her judgment is wrong? Each time she blinked at them, her vision became a little blurrier. Even though she doesn't know the world, she still knows much. People often said that when they were talking about her mother, Annette Baden, she is naive enough to trust a man like that. She's not very smart. They always said stuff like that after she got with Walter Hardy, the poor woman who only found herself in the situation because she was so naive. Foolish Annette Baden. As she lay on her sick bed, withering away day by day, the whispers only grew in intensity. She was young at the time, but she was intuitive enough to understand why her mother was in a sick bed. It was the man who hurt her, his father. The memory of her mother, who eventually passed, shone in the stars. The grandmother and grandfather, who wept until they were out of breath, and the father that left the funeral after only a brief visit, also shone in those stars. My dear Erna, please go out and be happy, for your mother's sake. Baroness Baden had told her. There was no denying it. Erna knew that her grandmother and grandfather saw her as a replacement for their lost daughter. She felt like she owed it to them, as well as her mother, to live a happy life in her memory. A red rose from Bjorn, a shed tear from her grandmother, the second wedding of Prince Bjorn, who stirred up the whole country with his actions. She had no way of making anything happen. When that fact engraved itself clearly on her mind, the tumult of her mind eased. After catching her breath and quieting her mind, Erna looked ahead, to the front of the boat. Her tousled brown hair billowed in the wind with the hem of her coat. She still wanted to believe in Bjorn, the one who had offered his hand every time she was in trouble. Those hard eyes that contained warmth for her and a smile that felt like love. She wanted to trust her own judgment, rather than the horrible rumors. To love her fate. Erna resolutely ate the last of the chocolate. It was so sweet that she was starting to get a little sick from it. She did as Lisa had suggested, and she was feeling much better. It was an overly big fate Erna had put herself on. She was the one who put herself on this path, not anyone else, so she had to take responsibility for where she found herself. There was no point fighting against it or hiding from it like a coward. Even if it meant swallowing a poisonous mushroom, Erna had an obligation to survive and be happy. She turned away from the sea and felt fresh determination. Be strong, Maine. Erna stepped away from the railing and headed back to her cabin. With each step, she repeated the mantra and felt it pump strength into her. The next morning, the boat arrived at its destinations, Lars, their first honeymoon destination, the home of Princess Gladys. Bjorn finished up by adjusting the sash and the emblem draped over his shoulder. Bjorn turned away from the mirror as he put on his gloves. He raised the sword and checked it for marks. There was no trace of the problem child anymore. He was a dignified figure in a crisp black uniform, blue belt, and dazzling golden ornamentation. "Would you really mind going alone, Your Highness?" the attendant asked. Bjorn had announced that he would be meeting the King of Lars alone. He was not to be accompanied by the Grand Duchess or any of the delegation. Everyone was nervous, but Bjorn was calm and focused. "Are you afraid the Prince of Lechen is going to get whipped by the King of Lars?" "You Highness, whipped. It might happen, which is why it's best I go alone." Less embarrassment. Bjorn grinned as he strode across the bedroom with wide, graceful strides. The attendant just looked at him with wide-eyed worry. After disembarking from the boat and then taking a day to rest, they had been in the city for 3 days before they were finally able to meet with the king. They were staying at the Manster Palace, the guest house of the Lars royal family. Bjorn. Erna greeted Bjorn as he came into the drawing room. She had been sitting in a chair and stood up abruptly when he came into the room. She looked like she was seeing Bjorn off to battle. "Are you sure you're okay?" Erna asked. "If it's not, will you accompany me? You only need to ask." Even though he had been joking, Erna's response was flat and serious. The ribbon in her hair swayed slightly. From the moment they stepped from the ship, Erna had showed a lot of determination to fulfill her role as the Grand Duchess. "How is this? And how about that?" She would diligently babbled about the things she thought a Grand Duchess should be. He said she was being absurd, but somehow that only made her double her efforts, and Bjorn found that increasingly cute. In the evenings, he found he had to kiss her more than usual because even in bed, she would not stop talking about doing her duty. Late, he gently stroked his wife's blushed cheek. "If I get beaten up, it's all on you to avenge me." Erna blinked at him, her eyes going wide. "I beg your pardon." Her eyes narrowed. "You're making another joke." "A bad one." Bjorn giggled nonchalantly. Erna let out a small sigh and looked at her husband. He was an enigma in many ways, but one thing was certain. He loved making fun of his wife. "Don't worry, my dear," a long finger stroked her chin. "I fight to win and don't stop until I do. Please don't joke like that, I'm really worried." When his gloved hand stroked her lip, she shuddered and pushed his hand away. She looked like someone who had been caught doing something they shouldn't. That made her so much more adorable. "It's because of me, isn't it?" Erna said, looking away in embarrassment. "It's because I married you." So the relationship between Lechen and Lars. Erna, his smile faded. "There is nothing wrong with the relationship between Lechen and Lars. Nothing in the past or future is going to change that." "Really?" "Of course." Bjorn was convinced. He considered the risks and knew that the alliance between Lechen and Lars must remain strong. It was to the benefit of both countries, and Bjorn was determined to keep it that way. Bjorn had considered this very carefully and had made up his mind long before the honeymoon was planned. He wished he didn't have to stop in Lars at all, but it was unavoidable. But it was fortunate that he only needed to deal with the king and be on their way as soon as possible. I'm sorry I couldn't be of any help. You could help by letting me slip in from the back, Bjorn said quietly. I beg your pardon. Erna glared at him in shock, surprise, and disbelief. She looked around for anyone that might have heard. They were alone. Bjorn found it amusing. Even after the first time he tried to turn her over, she declared that she was a lady, not an animal. She was worth the trouble of having to soothe her through most of the night. Even when she finally relented, she was not happy about the position. It gave him a little sadistic pleasure looking at her swaying beneath him. After giving her a passionate kiss on the cheek, Bjorn headed out of the room. Erna followed him and saw him off. She saw him off every morning and greeted him every time he came home. It was part of her wifely duties and that of a Grand Duchess. Hey, Bjorn, Erna called after him, just as he was about to close the carriage door. Will you be coming back late? Maybe. Can we still have dinner together? Erna gave him her best puppy eyes. There was a moment's pause as they looked at each other, a battle of wills sparking between them. Then Bjorn surrendered and nodded. Erna smiled brightly. Erna waved a hand with a flutter as the carriage pulled away, like petals caught on the wind. Bjorn laughed. It was a soft laugh with a little warmth added to it. It was something different from his usual faded smile. Congratulations on your marriage, the King of Lars said, though he never meant it. Thank you, Your Majesty, Bjorn replied, playing along. The two played their parts expertly, like actors performing a well-rehearsed play. Their conversations flowed as naturally as a freshwater stream. The ministers who stood outside the door, trying to listen in, trembled nervously. Although it comes too late, I must say that I am grateful of the proposal you sent to me, with Princess Gladys compliments. I regret that my will Gad already been pulled me along another course. I will remember that consideration for a long time to come. Bjorn wanted to get that out the way at the start, in the hopes that it would make things a little less awkward between them. Arthur Hartford's eyes creased as he took in the words. He felt he was being provoked by the prince, who always wore a smile like he had some deep plot going on. His eyes never gave away his intentions. They were always so cold and calculating. Did you really think you could use your daughter to meddle in the internal affairs of another country? The king imagined Bjorn was actually saying. Of course, it was an outrageous response to an act of faith, a helping hand to get him back his crown. But it was also laced with warning that he should not forget his trespass. As will I, Arthur said out loud, with a laugh in his tone. The king had expected Bjorn to have become spiteful over the years, but he seemed like the same Bjorn he had met when he came over to Lars and used Gladys as a means to tighten a snare around Lars. It was not my intention to meddle in the affairs of Lechen. I am well aware of the ferocity with which the wolves of Lechen can operate. I was trying to offer a hand of peace, to atone for my foolish daughter. I trust in your sincerity. In return, I hope you understand Lechen's intent. Bjorn said. Bjorn. Arthur let out a long sigh. I fully understand you're not wanting Gladys back, but you must put aside personal feelings and think rationally. Having you as the crown prince would be far more beneficial. You must see that. Having Leonid ascend would be no different. We would still maintain a friendly relationship, Your Majesty. Considering my brother would be a far more considerate and kind king, do you not think the situation would be better with him? You really have no attachments to the crown, do you? If I wanted to hold on to it, I would never have let it go in the first place. Bjorn smiled. Arthur's gaze narrowed as he tried to read Bjorn, but his face was cold, hard, and unmoving. Lechen's mad dog has returned, a name that had been given to Bjorn's great-grandfather, Philip II, the conqueror from Lechen. A gnashing enemy to everyone but Lechen itself, and his wolf banner is still widely talked about. Back then, one country would beat another, then later that country would beat the other back. That wasn't the case for Lechen. Its mad dog bit out at everyone, and no one was brave enough to try and muzzle Philip II. Lars was always the worst bitten. There was a brief moment when Lars was richer and more powerful than Lechen. During this time, the King of Lars led a cavalry charge right into the heart of Lechen and obtained the mad dog's surrender. That was the pride of Lars. It did not last long, as the following year Philip II led a massive naval engagement that nearly destroyed the entire navy of 3 countries. It became the cornerstone victory for the young king, who was barely 30 years old. He went on to conquer the entire continent and unite the countries, bringing peace. It was a close call. Reluctance and resignation eventually gave way, and the beaten looked upon it as an opportunity to prosper in their unity. The continent stabilized, industry blossomed, and an era of prosperity began. Fortunately, the light of a brighter future also fell on the wolves of Dniester, and their descendants took to the peace, unlike their ancestors. Worried that the wolves would bare their teeth again, a marriage was arranged between Bjorn and Gladys. At the time, Bjorn was being labeled as the second coming of the mad dog. The young prince was proving to be very much like his great-grandfather, a cold-hearted conqueror, another mad dog. He had not even started his era yet, and already people were becoming afraid of what he was going to do. So, when he gave up the crown, everyone but Lechen was relieved. Arthur nodded, shaking away the thoughts. In all honesty, Bjorn, if I cannot make you my son-in-law and put you on the throne, maybe it would be better if you were kept far away from positions of power. Then we have reached a consensus on what would be best for the both of us. Bjorn said, "Best? Is this really what is best for you and Lechen?" Bjorn faced Arthur, who eyed him suspiciously. Bjorn smiled lightly, and Arthur couldn't find a shred of regret in that smile. He did see the image of the mad dog in him, though. "It has become a time of chaos, Your Majesty, a time where we need negotiators, not conquerors, to navigate the waves of tumult, to solidify the peace that is quickly spiraling out of control. Are you not confident that you can be a negotiator? Is that why you hand the crown off to your brother? It's not that I don't feel I am capable. I understand the burden of the crown, a weight that cannot be lifted once it has been put on." Bjorn looked out the window of the meeting room, thinking, "I just feel my brother would be better suited to the role. I just can't justify dedicating my one and only life to values that are different to my own." What values would they be for someone who set aside the crown with no regrets? That's probably, I guess, living life to its fullest, enjoying everything it has to offer. Arthur looked at Bjorn gobsmacked. Was he really sitting before the king of another country and talking this nonsense? He burst out laughing. "A very beautiful value indeed, and I don't suppose buying up Lars Bank is part of that?" "Oh, it's an honor that your Majesty would take an interest in my small investments." "Small investments?" "Yes. Didn't the Prince Alexander of Lars recently buy up the most famous horse from Lechen some time ago?" The audacity of comparing Prince Alexander's hobby of racehorses and Prince Bjorn's attempts at merging with the Bank of Lars made Arthur laugh again. "Leonid is well aware of the price both countries have paid for our unity. So there is no need to be worried, Your Majesty. There is no need for arranged marriages. The alliance will remain as strong as ever. You have my promise on the honor of the Dniesters." Sunlight broke through a gap in the clouds and shone through the windows into the meeting room. What a foolish woman his daughter had been. The regret deepened. "Can I open the door now?" Bjorn said, motioning to the door behind him with a tilt of the head. "The ministers must be worried sick that you might have beaten me to death. Why do you put up with the awful rumors? Is it because you like to be seen as a troublemaker?" Arthur tried to make light conversation in response to Bjorn's joke. "I suppose you could say that, but please consider, I am on my honeymoon," Bjorn said with a smile. "I understand your meaning, but why on earth did you get married the way you did? What a wonderful woman your bride must be." Karen let out a sigh as she rubbed the nape of her neck. The Grand Duchess had been sitting at her reading table, memorizing the Lechen nobility's family tree for several hours now. Karen had to stand by her side and give guidance where asked. "How do you pronounce this family name? What crest does that family belong to? And what does it all mean?" "I'm sorry, Karen, are you tired?" the Grand Duchess said with a look of concern. "No, Your Highness." She gave a mechanical answer. Karen's disapproval was evident on her face, though. It would seem that the youngest member of the royal family, Greta, who was only 12, knew more about this than the Grand Duchess. "I hear you and Bjorn have been together for a long time," Erna said, trying to make conversation. "Yes, Your Highness. I have been serving the Dniester since they were young boys." "Mrs. Fitz says you are very loyal. I think so too." Karen narrowed her eyes at the Grand Duchess. "Yes, Your Highness, thank you." She got the impression the Grand Duchess was trying to say something. "I understand that you are unhappy with me because you respect and love Bjorn, Karen." Erna still smiled softly. "I know you think I am not good enough to be his wife." "What?" "No, Your Highness, So I will study hard and I will work very hard to be the Grand Duchess that people like you are not ashamed of. All I ask is that you help me. Please." Karen swallowed dryly and sighed. Her tummy was all twisted and she couldn't stand it. She could do nothing more than accept the order. Erna seemed satisfied and turned her attention back to the almanac. The barrage of questions didn't come to an end until the sun had fully set. Then, Erna went to get ready for dinner with her husband. Karen was standing outside, getting some fresh air when a message came for Erna. It said that Bjorn was going to be late and that Erna should eat without him. "Tell her later," Karen said. "The Duchess is changing right now. It would be rude to disturb her." "Hey, isn't that Jade?" a maid said. They turned around to look and saw the maid of honor of Princess Gladys running toward them.